Board members. Okay, I seeing 7 board members. I think let's go ahead and get started with the meeting. This is the beginning of part 3 of today's all-day work session, standard school year calendar. And I'm going to turn it over here to Marty Smith to explain what we're looking at here with these 2 proposed calendars and to inform us of this so we can ask any questions we have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wilson. And I do think that Dr. Garza may want to make a few comments about the calendar before we get started.
Thank you. As always, we wanted to get board member input and feedback before we even posted a calendar for the community or for your consideration, because it can create confusion in the community if we have several of them posted. Now, as always, this is months of, this process that, we've taken this to every group of employees we possibly can. And we've gotten quite a bit of feedback from FCCPTA, from our stack, from other employee groups. And I think are on version 7 or 8. And it'll likely change some more after our conversation today. But I just have to emphasize, and I know I don't have to say this for this board, but this is very complex. And I think sometimes the community, I find, they're quick to point out sometimes that they want one thing to change, not understanding how it's so interconnected. If you move one thing, how you have to move the rest. It's kind of like a puzzle piece. I think I've kind of made light of it, but it to some extent represents how, some of this we can't completely control, and there's no perfect calendar, unfortunately. So we are not, the staff leadership team are not vested in one particular way or the other. We just want the calendar to reflect the largest, kind of the preference of our varied stakeholder groups, knowing that we can never find, develop one that makes everyone happy. We did do a quick assessment with regard recently to find out whether or not the full 2 week at winter break or the split winter break was kind of the preferred model, because remember last year we did the same thing, because we came to this work session and I think you all asked us, what does our community prefer? So we wanted to be able to share that with you today. It's actually different than what I had anticipated. So it's good to get that quick assessment. It's still a work in progress. So today we're anxious to hear your feedback, insight. We'll leave the survey up, and prior to the final modifications made to either one of these calendars that we have before you, we'll have continue to benefit from that feedback we're getting from the community. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Smith and Dr. Ramey, and they'll tell you kind of where we are with the 2 options presented, and tell you kind of walk you through the differences between the 2. And then we're anxious to get your feedback into that, into development, and then they'll give us some direction over refining the final calendar.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Garza. So if we remember back to April 28th, the board directed Dr. Garza and staff to create a pre-Labor Day calendar and bring that back here in the fall. So we've done just that. And as Dr. Garza said, we took it several stakeholder groups. We've gotten a lot of feedback on the calendar, which is why we're on version 7 and 8 currently. And we take that feedback very seriously as we're developing the calendar. We look at a variety of different issues and concerns that are brought up by our stakeholder groups and do try to take that into consideration. One of the pieces that has remained constant for our calendar in the past is that we've built a 180-day calendar for students. And within that, we have an additional 14 days for our teachers because of the 194-day contract that our teachers work. So we create a calendar with 180 yellow days and then 14 pink days, as I call them, within the remaining holidays that round out the calendar. So we're bringing you first some calendars. The draft calendar for version 8 because, as Dr. Garza said, we thought that we might be making a recommendation for a particular calendar based on some initial feedback that we had received from our stakeholders. And so last week we created a survey, and it actually turns out that our numbers are going in a different direction, and I'll share some of those numbers with you as we get further into the discussion. But if you draw your eyes to the calendar, we're going to go from the left to the right and then from the top to the bottom. You'll note on draft 8, our first day back for our new teachers is August 14th for our new teacher professional development week. First day back for other staff would then be, our teaching staff would be August 21st, with the first day of school being the 28th for students. We then have, moving to September, we have our holiday off for Labor Day, and we've built in school planning day at the end of the month on the 22nd. We've generally left September free, but given that we're starting 1 week earlier, we had feedback from teachers stating that they would like to have some additional time, also from principals stating that they would like to have some additional time to talk about and make plans for students within the month of September. We then move into October with the Columbus Day holiday, noted there on the 9th, with no days off outside of the Columbus Day holiday. For November, we have the end of the quarter on the 3rd of November with a school planning day and teacher work day located co-located with the end of the quarter, with the 7th being our election day. You'll also note that we have an early release on the 22nd of November with our Thanksgiving holiday on the 23rd and 24th. It's important to note that in November for 2017, Veterans Day is on a Saturday, and so we haven't noted that on the calendar. I see Ms. McLaughlin smiling at me on that. With December, so one of the options that we took to our stakeholders, and it was really feedback that we received from principals and teachers, was to make some changes to our normal 2-week winter break, to shorten that by a few days so that we might possibly end the school year a few days earlier. It would allow us to end the school year earlier for students by 1 day, and it actually helps our teachers by 2 days because we were able to place one of the school planning days into the calendar. So you'll note that we have the 18th and 19th would be school days for students in December, with the 20th then through the 1st of January being winter break. We then move to January. You'll see that we have Martin Luther King holiday off on the 15th, with the end of the quarter on the 25th, with a teacher work day and staff development day. On this particular version of the calendar in February, we do have a school planning day on February 16th, which is then adjacent to the President's Day holiday. For March, we have our winter break at the end of the month, and one thing that both our principals and teachers have appreciated is having the school planning day after they return from the spring break holiday. So we've been able to include that on the calendar with the end of the quarter on the 13th. And with every group, I've pointed out that that's my birthday. I don't know why, but I just have to always say that when I see the 13th of April. And that's adjacent to the teacher. Mr. Moon is making note of that. I'll be looking forward to that next year. You'll see then on the 16th, we have a teacher work day. If you move to May, we have the Memorial Day holiday on the 28th. We know that we do have standards of learning tests during that month. We will put those test dates on the calendar once we know those test dates, but those dates are not available at this time. With this calendar, we have the end of the school year on the 14th, the last day for students, and the 15th would be the last day for our teachers. So initially, this calendar received quite a bit of positive feedback from our staff members, and it received positive feedback from our parents. And so coming to you, we thought, well, we're going to recommend this calendar. Well, we're going to pull back that recommendation because, as Dr. Garza shared, and we'll move to calendar 7 now. As Dr. Garza shared, we did send a survey out last week to our stakeholders through the FCPS News You Choose. And at this point, we've received 12,000 responses to that survey. It's a lot. In a very few days' time, we received quite a few responses, and we're trending currently. 68% of those respondents are liking version 7, with 32% of those respondents liking version 8. So with that, we're going to share version 7, which is where we've gotten most of our support from our stakeholders. Everything pretty much remains the same with this particular calendar, with the biggest change occurring in December. You'll note that we have a full 2 weeks for our winter break. The other change with this calendar is that we were not able to build in a school planning day on February 16th for as a student day off, and that then pushes the end of the school year for students to June 15th, and then our last 2 days for teachers would be Monday and Tuesday, with the 18th being a school planning day and the 19th being the last day for teachers as a teacher work day. So those are the biggest differences with the two calendars. I should point out also on the previous version, and you don't have to go there, we've always liked our semesters to balance out 90-90. With the previous calendar, our semesters balance out 92-88. We would have to make a simple change to our regulation as staff to accommodate that change if that calendar was a selected calendar. But you'll notice that version 7 is a 90-90 day semester. So that is the calendar, and we've gotten to this point with great thought. We've taken a lot of time to actually take this calendar out to our stakeholders and hear what they've had to say about the calendar and those dates. And again, this is all for your consideration, and we will make the necessary changes to have a good calendar for the 17-18 school year.
I might also, one more thing, Mr. Wilson, if I could. I know there's been some question about the certain religious holidays and making, taking, making a concerted effort to make sure that our schools are up to speed on when those religious holidays are, and what we can do to take care of children who need to recognize those religious holidays. We've actually been studying other surrounding jurisdictions and others across the country to see. I know that we're probably, unless the board wants to change their policy, not going to definitively say that we will honor every holiday, because we're not going to be in a position to do that. But we do recognize that we need to make sure that our principals and our school communities are well, and teachers are very familiar. So we will be continuing some work on that, and we're looking at putting together a set of kind of a guidelines or a document that helps be more explicit about what our expectations are there. So I wanted you to be aware of the fact that we take seriously the religious holidays and making sure that we're taking care of our families and in our diverse community. We're doing that, but maybe we need to make sure that as we change personnel, as we hire new people, and so we're looking at how we beef that up a little bit. So I just wanted to put that on the table as well.
Thank you, Dr. Garza. Okay, so Dahlia, you got on the list first.
Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Garza. I appreciate you and Marty meeting with me on this topic, as you know, it's very dear to my heart. Making sure that we are looking at our religious holidays, not just, when we can, being able to give our families and staff time off if it's feasible, but also being thoughtful and mindful in how we communicate it. I know you've been looking at Montgomery County and their guidelines, their calendar, making it easy to see for the interfaith what calendars are there. I did meet with members of the Jewish Community Relations Council, because every year they send both a holiday calendar and guidelines and its holidays for several of the major religions to be included in there, as well as national and community holidays. It's all in one place. So I think that's what's really helpful. Also a letter that the rabbi of our largest synagogue sends every year to principals. So hopefully we can incorporate some of that. Most of the feedback I've received, and I remember growing up how hard it was when teachers or principals didn't know what it meant. It's just what it means. I know that some parents were really grateful that when they had a new principal, a letter was sent out, just being thoughtful, saying, I know this is difficult. We will ensure that our staff understand, what it means for you to celebrate this holiday. And even though we will continue on in class, we'll make sure that there are not special days. I know we had an issue in one school this year where there was a field trip, and when actually a student was asked to come back in the afternoon of Yom Kippur. So that just was kind of eye-raising. So I know most of our staff and principals are aware of this, but when we have, turnaround and just making sure across the board that we're clear in our communication. So I do hope that we can look at it both as when we publish our calendar, internal and external calendars, that it's clear, that people can see whether they are in the school, in the PTA, in the community. These are dates to keep in mind. These are when they're celebrated. The guidelines I know Montgomery has and JCRC, it says which holidays begin at sunset, which holidays are day holidays, evening, just so it's an education piece.
And so with that, we do provide that for staff. On the intranet, we have
I understand.
a
Can I
calendar.
continue? We'll
Oh,
get
I'm
back-
sorry.
No, thank you, and I appreciate that. And I think it's just a work in progress. I think there are a lot of things we're doing really well. Actually, some of our guidelines are better than Montgomery County's. I think part of it is where it's published, how it's communicated. So within that, I know I spoke, Marty, and I hope we can work with our new Human Resources Advisory Council, perhaps. I know Montgomery County, they have a calendar committee that works on that and has members from the county's Interfaith Council. I actually reached out to Sandy Chisholm, haven't heard back yet, who leads Fairfax County's Interfaith Clergy Council. I know the co-chairs are a rabbi and an imam, and so hopefully they can work with us, just so it's part of the initial process and we don't have to go backwards, and part of moving forward and looking at guidelines for principals when possible. Can these days be incorporated? I know this year was especially hard because the Jewish holidays and Eid were all on school days. Next year it's a little bit easier. I believe Eid and Yom Kippur are both on the weekend, so it takes a little bit off. But the big feedback I hear is just being thoughtful, and it makes a difference just when principals and teachers acknowledge that and make sure that we're doing that. Also for our staff, I did hear from several staff members, and I know we communicated, Chase, just to be clear what the guidelines are. And it does seem like sometimes some principals are more understanding than others, some administrators. So I don't know if there's something on the HR level we can do with that, just so people know that, that they need to have reasonable ways to make up days missed for religious reasons. I know it's in there, but it might be communication on that part. So, it's that would be huge. I think we do a lot of things well. And part of it is now that we have a new website, can we find a way to communicate it all in one place so people don't have to be searching to kind of see how to do that. So that's kind of the number one. I would appreciate if we can do that. If that means the next step or policy from our end, we can look into that. But if that's not necessary, or if we need to discuss that, what's the best place to address that? That would be really helpful.
And so I think that you brought up some very good points. You mentioned HRAC as a possible place for having this work begin with some recommendations for the board. I know that in the past, when we've developed the calendar, we haven't had any specific directions around religious holidays. So as we develop the calendar and bring it to the board, we don't specifically highlight those holidays within the calendar itself, but we do have processes on the back end to support principals and support schools in helping them recognize when those holidays occur and when they fall, and guidance. And as Dr. Garza says, that perhaps with newer principals and newer staff, we may have to reiterate some of this guidance, but we do provide that guidance on a quarterly basis as well as at the beginning of the year so that they know when those holidays fall.
But we do recognize, we have heard you that there may be a way to put this, not parse it out quarterly, but have it in one document.
And so
and then reminders quarterly,
and
maybe.
so where I was going is that, and that being said, we can always do a better job of getting the information out and ensuring that it's in one place and in a place where everyone can have access to it, and not just perhaps behind the FCPS intranet wall.
Right, and I appreciate it. And I think it's not only just, places where it hasn't worked. I've also heard of some best practices. So like we were saying, perhaps we can have a sample letter, for principals just to touch base with their communities. just to know, we're with you. We understand this is difficult time, especially because it's the beginning of the school year. But we're with you. Please reach out to us if you have any issues that arise in a classroom. If something does happen, if we can just make it easier. There's so much on everyone's plate to do that. So I appreciate and happy to, support that effort in any way, or to connect us to some of the groups that are doing this kind of without us right now on the side, because maybe they feel that we're not as clear in our communication. So no, I appreciate that, and I appreciate your work in having the separate calendars. I also heard anecdotes when I went to PTAs for one versus the other. It seemed to be kind of a mixed bag as to the length of winter holiday. It seemed very split, so I know that's not an easy one. But
So don't look at me, we're looking at you.
right. So I don't know what you need to hear from us right now. This also, I think, is another reason why I would love a calendar committee where we can have people engaged in that, so that every year it's not let's do a survey again. I don't know if it would help, but kind of let's preemptively, proactively engage
We have lots of our committees that have a say in the development of this. We don't have one committee that does just this, but I would tell you that there's been several months of work put into this. So
I know. I think the first one I saw was draft 3, so I appreciate that. I think a little bit is, not to say, let's throw it out there and have everyone weigh in, but because we're looking at so many factors all the time, I don't know, do we want to have the religious holiday be separate committee than a per calendar committee, or should they be?
And I think that might be a question more for the board. than staff.
Okay, that's good. So I guess you're wanting to hear from us right now, draft 7 versus draft 8. Is that what we're?
Yes, getting some feedback on the particular drafts.
Okay, I'll come back to that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Palchik. Next on the list, we have Ms. Huff, then Ms. Strauss, then Mr. Moon. Ms. Huff?
Thank you. So my first question is a parent who gets shocked by it every time, and we all talk about it at the bus stop. Can you just go over the rationale for the 2-hour early release at every quarter?
So the 2-hour release at quarter time. Right now, when we develop this calendar, our teachers do use that time to actually start to address grades. And when you think about the number of grades that teachers have to actually do and have in a timely fashion for reporting purposes, staff members do actually collaborate on those days and start working on their grades during that 2-hour early release. So while students are released early, teachers are still in the building, and they do use that time specifically to work on their grades.
So is there any other way we can work that in? Of the things I get feedback on, I will say that is probably one of the number one things I get feedback on. Although we send out the reminders that it's going to be a 2-hour early release, I think because of how, families are planning and they're figuring out their week, I think that often is catching people by surprise and maybe not doing our community the best of service. But I also understand and appreciate the fact that teachers are using that time. So I don't know if there's another way that we could talk about doing that.
I would tell you, I do think that, I think disrupting families' calendars and their weeks does make it difficult. I'll tell you, when I first came to Fairfax, we were allowing schools to have early releases whenever they wanted to. Believe it, pretty much. Am I making this up?
No, you're not making that up.
Okay. So we've curtailed this in a significant way. And with I'm not sure that everyone loved it either at the campus level, but for the reasons you pointed out, is that changes, that makes it very difficult for parents when we have an early release. I mean, so I totally understand what the point that you're making. Certainly, if however the board feels on this, I just wanted to point out that the context is that we've reined it in a bunch already, and it was not necessarily well received. We kind of we brought them along with us.
And it was our principals and teachers who asked for that additional time, given that grades are often due that following Monday, and not having enough time to get those grades in, they at least wanted an opportunity to have a jump start when students weren't in the building. So it is important to point out that teachers are not leaving early on those early release days because they are working on their grades.
All right. Well, this is my first year going through this, so perhaps I'll need to be more proactive about it next year. I'm not gonna, overstep and say teachers don't need that time, or
No.
that teachers don't want that time. But I will say that's the number one thing I've gotten the most feedback on, and I think we need to pay attention to that. So some of the other questions, I've tried to print off all of the comments I received, and maybe that's a comment about the survey. I felt like many people felt frustrated that there was nowhere to comment, because do we know why they like 7 versus 8, and could we even do a better, if 8 was your initial recommendation, could we have done a better job to make 8 better, but there was something overall with 7 that they liked, that then we're scrapping 8 and doing 7?
So even with providing more opportunity for comment, as Dr. Garza said earlier, that it's very difficult to take some aspects of one calendar and place it into another calendar. For instance, we've had people share that they like having the school planning day on February 16th on draft 8, and so could we just add that to draft 7? Well, when you look at that, the way that we add that to draft 7, when you have a yellow day and you replace it with any other day, you have to add a yellow day to the calendar, which then puts the last day for students on June 18th, which is a Monday.
Right.
So getting a lot of feedback from folks who might be frustrated, and we understand some of that frustration, and trying to apply that and pulling the best of individual calendars, it can be very difficult to do. So that's why we offered the 2 calendars as the choice, and really looking at the winter holiday as the choice, just to get some very quick turnaround feedback for the board for today's meeting.
Okay, because some of the other feedback I received was that people would be up for shortening the winter break, but not just 18th, 19th, 18th, 19th, 20th. If it would help us get out of school earlier that week of June 11th. Because even the way draft 8 and 7 are written, we're still only getting out one day later with 7, even though it's 2 holiday days added.
And it's 2 holiday days added because we were able to use that second holiday as a yellow day, as a placeholder for the February 16th school planning day. So while it's a 2-day difference at the holiday time, it only shows up as 1 day at the end of the year because we've used an additional yellow day for February school planning.
Is that why that school planning is on June 18th on draft 7, but not on draft 8?
Okay. Yes.
That's what that is. Okay. And then my last question is about the snow days. So another one of the questions I often get is, can we get snow days back at the end of the year if we don't use them?
So the reason why, and that's not a question that only goes to you, we get that question a lot. And so the reason why we cannot get those snow days back is that we haven't built actual days, physical days into the calendar. We're looking at the 990-hour requirement, and the length of our school day for students goes beyond the 990-hour requirement. So when you look at the totality of the number of hours that students are in school, and you take anything over 990 and you divide it out, that's where we get the 13 additional days. Because we've also had staff members say, well, can we get paid for the days that we work over? It's important to note again that we're not looking at days, we're looking at hours. And the length of a teacher contract is 7.5 hours, and they work a 194-day contract. That's what they're paid for. They're not being paid.
Say those numbers again.
Sure, certainly. So it's a 180-day calendar for students, a 194-day calendar for teachers. That's their contract, and their contracted day is 7.5 hours. With the 990 hours.
So this calendar is 194 teacher days, contract days.
It's 194 contracted teacher days.
Okay, so the snow day, if there was a snow day, Or, okay, that makes sense. So if we don't use the snow days, we're paying them for the time that they're there. If they get a snow day, it's an extra day to them paid.
Yes,
Okay.
because we don't make those days up.
Okay.
But we do have the hours built into the calendar.
We don't even go by, okay, we have a 180-day calendar, and we have for the last couple of years. So when we miss one day for snow, we no longer meet the 180-day requirement. So then we revert
To hours.
to 990 hours. And that's how we start to comply with the state's provisions on that. And I will tell you, as much as maybe some want us to go back to the old calendars where we used to have snow days at the end, I'm telling you what, when I had to do that my first year here, no one liked that.
Okay.
Oh, I'm telling you what, I heard from everybody. And they're not good it's not good quality instructional time when it's, tucked, just added to the end of the year. So I, certainly appreciate hearing all that feedback, but there's always the other side of the, the argument of the story.
No, I think it's good to go through the facts so we can.
So again, we can't pull those days out of the calendar because we haven't added any physical days into the calendar. We're only adding that time.
We're just reverting to how we count then.
Yes, it's based
okay.
on how we count.
Okay. All right.
But you see, it's so complex, right? And so for a lot of folks that don't do this all the time, I appreciate and I'm glad you bring all that those questions forward. You can see why it gets difficult to explain. I can't tell you how many times I've explained the snow days. And Steve, you'll get to explain that again when it starts to happen again.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Huff. Ms. Rouse?
Thank you. Either calendar is fine with me. I'm curious, I'll sort of go with whatever the community wants. And so what you're saying right now, the community is trending towards this.
Version 7.
Version
so that's
7.
it's
Okay, that's
currently
interesting.
68%
Okay.
versus 32%.
Whoa. I've been encouraging community members, please go online and vote. Let us know what you want. Because as long as we satisfy all of our other requirements, and it's interesting because I'll hear some people say we give children too many holidays and that we really need a very long summer break, and then we have the problem of the lost summer learning. The one interesting thing, Ms. Huff, I was going to say, the early release allows us to count that as a full day for children, which it accounts in the 180 days. But yet we get a twofer because then it also gives the teachers the planning and the work time that they need. So and that's always a challenge. How do we give teachers the time that they need, and how do we create the student days that the state requires us to have without disrupting everybody? So that's always where that sort of early release comes in traditionally.
And in fact, just because I think it's important, because I so agree with Ms. Huff's point, because I do hear it from parents, and that's why we initially started looking at this. The early releases make it very difficult for parents. We had some schools that took an early release every week. They would just communicate to their communities, and we allowed that kind of flexibility back when. We don't allow it anymore.
Right,
Correct.
because an early release, as long as you are only letting the children go 2 hours early, it still counts as a full day from the state. So that was always, and then we have professional development, so that was how we would get around that. In terms of understanding religious holidays, and of course, we will be spoiled because next year the religious holidays fall in a different pattern. It's going to be a year after that we have to make sure that everybody understands. I find that some of the disconnect, it's not just knowing when the days fall, but if your religious practice is one way and you don't understand all the requirements of another, some interpretation is, well, just enough time to go to church or your synagogue or your mosque, and then you're back in school. Whereas there are some religious holidays that are a full day. And I find that that's often where new teachers, new principals don't understand sort of the requirements, because we have so many important religious groups in Fairfax County now. So I think that it's not only highlighting when they occur, but what this means to that particular religion and those families and children. So
And there is room for us to clarify that. As I was looking at our regulations, and I was noting that we note when the holiday begins, there was some confusion even for people around the
Exactly.
table as well. Does the crescent mean this, or does it when the
Right.
sun sets? And so I think that we do have some room for clarification for
Yes,
staff.
and the changing time of sunset, all of those things, there are just many more nuances with each one of our major religions that people don't necessarily understand. Because in the olden days in our regulation, it emphasized the ability for staff or children or families to attend a religious service. And so often in people's minds, that means only one or two are coming in late, whereas this really has multiple meanings, and also fasting days when we know that children may be attempting to fast all day. So it's just better understanding of where
I think there's
families
an
are.
opportunity for us to take the different references that we have to religious in our current regulations and develop that one document, which is
Yes.
sort of a one-stop shopping, so to speak, with regard to information
Right.
around religious holidays and religious observances.
Right, and it's not just tests, but it's also field trips, because that was where we had one situation where they were not aware. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Strauss. I have Mr. Moon, then Ms. McLaughlin, then Ms. Derenak.
Okay, just one quick question on the survey that went out. The survey result that came back to us, would you be able to segregate between parents and staff?
Yes, we have the breakdown between parents and staff, and it's kind of mixed because we did ask members of the community and all stakeholders to identify their primary identification. So some said that primarily they were a Fairfax County parent. Others said that they were an employee. So we can get that information for you.
You can tell us now whether it's still
I don't know if it's on
the same for both staff
printout that
and
I have. Again, I didn't pull all that information, but we can get that for you. Again, the version that I'm seeing shows the 68% to the 32% currently.
that's both of them
That's
mixed together.
both of those mixed together, but we can get that information for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moon. Ms. McLaughlin?
Okay, a couple things. First of all, Ms. Schultz had to leave, so she passed me a note and asked me just to share with our colleagues that since Veterans Day is on Saturday next year, she won't be advocating like she has every year to get this observed in our calendar, but that she remains very passionate and supportive of what Dr. Garza has helped usher in recent years, which is to really emphasize the value of still raising awareness in our schools about Veterans Day, that it is a holiday, a federal holiday where we recognize and demonstrate appreciation and use it as a day of learning. So obviously that would be that Friday, the 10th. And so she's hopeful that will be a strong message we continue to convey to our schools when the new calendar is adopted, and really appreciates this great tradition. And then the second thing that she raised was something that I think other colleagues have said so far, which is, yes, some families do look at the fact that because we use, we have these school planning days and development days that that then does obviously require us to make sure we can get some more yellow days in there before the end of the school year ends. And so that, even though we're going to now start a week earlier, pre-Labor Day, we're not necessarily seeing a full get out a whole week, earlier, because we do still have some of these other planning days that are in there. So tagging on to that, which was my question, just to ask real quick to help with clarity for our families, I noted that we have a staff planning day in September on, I think it was draft Is it draft 7? Yes.
Draft 7.
Draft 7. So we have a staff planning day on September, and then we have another one that
November.
was in November. Okay. So are those where we might have thought, okay, we could move the staff planning day to the end of the school year so that the students would, like, in other words, they would just have instruction on those 2 days, and then they would just get out. You could subtract 2 yellows and put your 2 pink up there. I mean, I realize that part of the issue is when do you have staff planning days that are meaningful to professional development versus at the end of the school year.
And before you speak to the specific mechanics of Ms. McLaughlin's question, let me reiterate, because this happened a couple of years ago. When we had schools individually deciding when they were going to take early releases, I mean, it was all over the place. And so the way we got the schools on board with making a change and everyone having the same early releases, limited, but also having the same, is the fact that we built in the school planning days. So they had some opportunity throughout the course of the year for some professional development and some team planning. And so I'd be reticent. I mean, that was kind of the what's the word? I'm just drawing a blank. Kind of the trade-off from giving them unilateral flexibility at the campus level was having it in a calendar where it was easier for us to communicate to parents about when those would occur and limiting those to a certain extent. So that was the trade-off.
And actually, when you look at the placement of those days, the feedback from several staff members, from teachers and administrators, is that they would like to have those days earlier in the year than later. When you look at the school planning day on the 18th, you'll have people with big question marks on their faces saying, why did you place that day there? And really it gets back to, as you're developing the calendar, you have to ensure that if you're moving dates, you have to have 180 student days in the calendar. Now, what we did last year, or actually this year, if you remember, we brought teachers back early and had them start the Friday before the normal Monday, and we got split response from that. We had some teachers loved having that day early, and then we had several teachers who didn't like the fact that they had to come back on a Friday and not have that weekend away for the rest of their break. So it was mixed. It's interesting because some other feedback that we've gotten from principals and teachers is wondering if we could put flex days in the summer where teachers could come back during those summer dates and possibly do school planning and then be released from responsibilities during the school year. It would only help us if those flex days were, kind of permanent flex days, or if we did have assurances that all staff members would be able to make it in during those flexible summer dates. And not necessarily during the school year. But those are some options that we can take a look at.
I do think looking at both these drafts, and as Dr. Garza pointed out, you're trying to juggle the interests and concerns of 186,000 students and then also the 15,000 plus teachers and other administrators who also are impacted by a calendar, how you build it, how you build in the learning. The other thing that I wanted to kind of share is since I joined the board 5 years ago, I found it very interesting, the dialogue about observing religious holidays, showing sensitivity to our diverse community. And I am proud to be part of a board and a school system that I think does embrace, celebrate, and is very mindful of diversity in our community. But one of the things that I have always felt we need to be very clear on is when do we have these breaks and why? And our 2 major breaks we have is a winter break and a spring break. They are purposely not called your Christmas holiday break, your Easter holiday break. Yes, they fall near those. But what I thought was interesting is that in a quick Google search, the Pew Research came out just last year in their research survey results, 92% of Americans responded saying that they celebrate Christmas. Doesn't mean that they're Christians. In fact, 51% said they viewed Christmas as a religious holiday, and 32% said it's just cultural for me. And they said even a third of Jewish respondents said, yeah, they celebrate Christmas too because it's cultural for them. And so I bring this up because then even with Easter, numerous survey results came back saying that over 80% of Americans say they're going to recognize, celebrate Easter in some way. Again, not necessarily from its religious component. And so when I looked at the history of why we have our winter break where we have it, where we have our spring break where we have it, and again, it's not just Fairfax County, it's nationally, it's because school systems do have to be mindful, and also the state and federal governments. When are you going to suddenly have everyone asking to be gone to celebrate whatever is their cultural and or religious observances? And so I think we absolutely, as a school system, need to continue to promote, cultivate, and demonstrate support for everyone in our community who has religious observances that don't fall necessarily where there's a very large population that would cause us to shut down schools. But we've got to also really help educate the community that this isn't about showing preference to one religion over another. We have these breaks when we're going to lose a large portion of our student population. Other than that, you know, we certainly want our families to have their children be able to celebrate those religious holidays with no negative repercussions to their children's educational success and opportunity. And so whether it's a religious holiday, it could also just be there's regrettably a death in the family and a student's going to be out. Same sensitivity of it. If there's a family matter of any kind and students need to be out, then we have to provide our teachers and our administrators with the tools to communicate that sensitivity and work with the families. So I have watched very carefully Montgomery County's dialogue on it, and you know, I have worried a little bit that when they started dipping their toe and saying, okay, yes, let's make sure we start to broaden our cultural, you know, observances of holidays, now in a vastly developing, diverse country that we have, you end up making your breaks not really about the functionality of when these happen, but it's just a whole different dialogue. So I have found that to be very interesting, again, watching Montgomery County with it. I personally would like to see that we get to end as soon as possible. And that's why I, too, probably shared some of the surprise that draft 8 suddenly came forward as the one that people are starting to like, or draft 7, sorry, that draft 7 is, because it does extend us further. But I will go to then our earlier conversation again. If our students and our teachers are feeling like we live in a high-performing, high-pressure environment, that 2-week break is where people really do recharge their batteries over the winter holiday. And so I'm not voting for Megan McLaughlin's personal point of view. I only have a senior at that point. So I think I share my colleagues' point of view. The more input we get from our community, and I think it's pretty compelling at 62%, you said? 68, yeah, 68 to 32. You know, I'm inclined to go where people are telling us they prefer.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. I have Ms. Derenak Kofax, Ms. Corbett Sanders, Ms. Evans, and then Ms. Hines.
Just to share my point of view, I think I do agree with the public that 68%. I prefer calendar 7. Just to be certain, since no one has pointed this out, I think it's evident to us who have the both calendars in front of us. But comparing 7 to 8, 8 basically has 2 less winter break days, an extra school planning day on February 16th, and an extra day on spring break the Monday after that full week. Is that pretty much accurate, those three differences?
No,
And- no?
the differences are really the winter break
Right, the 2
and,
days?
and the end of the year. It's the same number of school planning days. We've simply moved,
Move the dates,
we've
move the
moved
calendar
that
dates.
school planning date,
Right,
yes.
right, you move that. I understand that. I'm sorry if that was confusing. So, yeah, and it ends 1 day earlier, correct?
And it does end 1 day earlier, yes.
Right. Okay, so that's just my vote. I think I like the calendar 7 more. We'll continue to, how long is the feedback going to stay open until?
That will stay open for as long as we need it to.
Okay, all right, so we'll see if that changes at all. And I think too, I do want to just speak for a moment on when we talk about religious observances. I think it is extremely important, and Dr. Garza, what was the document you held up? It was called
Well,
diversity.
we're looking at other school systems
Uh-huh.
across the country to see how they're communicating.
Right,
You know, making sure that people understand some of the nuances.
correct.
Um,
It was just called something.
This is one that Montgomery County put together, and I'm not suggesting it'll look exactly like this, because I think there's some things that we maybe have a little bit stronger in our regulation.
Okay.
But we do think there's some benefit to having a document that's updated every year with a specific calendar
I think that would be
religious
most, I
holidays.
think that would be most helpful. I
as a
think I.
Q&A and some other
Right,
things in it.
because
Mhm.
I have shared with you, some of you, that, there have been at least 2 of my schools where, and I think it's important how administrators communicate this to their staff, to their leadership, and to their leadership that manages the students in the school that plan events sometimes a year in advance. Because there were some, concerns this year, and I think being, as we said, a very respectful school system of people's religious diversity in religion, but it caused angst because there were things planned, there were monies spent, there were monies lost, things like that. So I think it's extremely important that maybe that document exists, maybe ensure, in the regs, I'm sure you probably have it, but, when we're talking, Mr. Smith, to our principal cohort, making sure there is a real chain of command and it's very clear to them who needs to know what, how long in advance they need to know about these differences that are out there, and what religious holidays are important to certain of our subgroups, and what that might do, and to ensure that planning major school events or things like that don't conflict with those.
Noted.
Thank you, Ms. Derenak Kofax. Ms. Corbett Sanders?
Yes, thank you very much. I really appreciate that you are keeping the link open for a while on getting feedback, because I know not everybody is fully aware that we're actually discussing calendars yet, and so I will be sending it out on my own email list to make sure people know. But I want to actually talk a little bit about the religious holidays as well, because something that this school system prides itself on is that we are an inclusive school system, and we embrace the cultural differences of all of these wonderful children and families that participate and come to us every day to learn. And so I think, although having a document which kind of gives a primer to our administrators and our staff is excellent, and we probably need to do that, I actually think that we as a school system probably need to do a bit of a better job on educating our students about the rich cultural backgrounds that so many of our students come to school with. And so for some of the bigger holidays, which impact whether or not students come to school, or if they come to school late, it might be helpful for us to just have some cultural competence training embedded into the education of our students themselves. Because my expectation is, by sending out or teaching kids why a group of students might not be in the classroom on a given day, then what you do is you actually teach kids to respect and embrace those cultural differences. And so I don't know, this is probably the wrong place for me to raise this issue, but it seems like it's directly connected to our calendar. And so, for example, the high holidays or Hanukkah or Eid, they're all very important holidays for the different religious faiths. And so if we can do a little bit of that, be it in our written communications to families or actually directly in the classroom, I would encourage that.
Thank you, Ms. Corbett-Sanders. Chairman Evans?
Thank you, and thanks for all the different iterations that you've done on the calendar. I know a lot of work goes into it. I think one of the things we can see from this is the impact that the pre-Labor Day start has had, that this is a lot more even, a lot more balanced, and so that's all to the good. I'm very glad to see that this to me looks more rational than some have in the past, less broken up. I feel like some of my other colleagues do, that if whatever the consensus is among parents and staff on which of the two work better, I'm fine with that. I'm always surprised that people would prefer the 2-week winter break to an earlier end of the school year, but that's what people prefer. That's fine with me. So I'll look forward to seeing what the final tally is. It looks like 68% is pretty clear cut, assuming that everybody has, heard that there's a way to weigh in on this. And
We sent that out several ways.
you have, okay.
We sent out in the newsletter.
Yeah, the news you choose, and again, we've gotten a landslide of
Okay.
responses.
And then it
Wonderful.
also went into the employee newsletter specifically.
Yes.
Excellent. I would be interested to see if there was a difference in the parents or the teachers. It sounds like so far you're not seeing a big difference between what staff feel and parents.
Actually, on the first day that it went out, it went out solely to employees on the Tuesday, and it was the employees who were far outpacing on version 7 than version 8. So from what I can tell, that it's a combination of both staff and families liking the 2-week break,
Okay.
more so, given the number of respondents that we've had who are either parents or staff members.
Okay. So yeah, it is interesting.
This
Yeah.
isn't a situation where we have one camp very much more so wanting something than another camp.
Okay, well, that's good. So I'm glad we're revisiting the issue of the religious holidays. That I have long felt that that's something that we. I know how much we do to try to communicate that, but I do think that we somehow need to get a better handle on it. The last time we looked at absentees, what struck me, that this has been a couple of years ago, a couple of my schools had on Eid holidays had 25% absentees. Glen Forest did. Stewart High School had about 25% of their students were missing. That's significant. So even if county-wide we don't have that big an absence, I think we need to be cognizant of those. And I'm wondering, I know this gets a little tricky, but I was looking at what just went out today about the religious holidays that are coming up for this coming quarter, and it strikes me that not all of those, I believe, would be considered major religious holidays that people would take their children out of school for. There's a long list of religious holidays that we tell people about, whereas I think if there are certain holidays that people will take their children out, for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but probably not for Hanukkah, right? So not to say that we
Yes.
shouldn't tell
I don't
people that, well, here's where I'm going with this. I'm wondering if we couldn't include in this what are considered major religious holidays for which families might actually pull their students out of school. You look like you want to say something, Dahlia.
Well, yeah, this was a little bit of my advocacy, and I guess I was told a little bit this might be the next step of do we because who decides those?
Well, that's why,
And
where I
can-
was going with this was if we worked with the religious communities.
That's what I'm hoping
And
is the
say,
next step.
yes, that if we worked with the different religious communities and asked them, so we wouldn't be saying, what they are, but saying, when will members of your religious community actually pull your students out of school?
Sorry.
My suggestion would be, we could come up with a draft of this document, but more specific information like that, I'm wondering if that's a good work for the HRAC
Well, but I was
to
hoping
take
that
on.
members of the
Might
clergy
be.
can be on HRAC, and part of it, for me, what Ms. Strauss said is, I grew up in a conservative synagogue, and we celebrated 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. Most Reform only celebrate one.
I
And
see,
so
okay.
there is so much, right, within each religion
Right.
also.
That's
where-
true. And Eid, some people say that, you can tell ahead of time, and
Right,
somebody,
and
and
Eid-
it has to do with a calendar that can change.
Right,
So
so I-
that gets a little tricky, I realize, too.
Right, so I think it
Yeah.
would be helpful just to have people who are there representing the interfaith communities.
And so while I value this document, I think that would be great. That's a lengthy document as opposed to having something that's right on here saying, to everyone who looks at our regular calendar. I'm seeing Dr. Garza grimacing. But
I'm just suggesting, before we go out and say, these are the holidays where families could keep their children home and this is where they can't, I think you need to hand that off to
to,
a com- a
I'm not
committee.
saying,
And then
that-
maybe down the
yeah.
road, if they're able to determine that, certainly at some point you probably could asterisk.
Is that you?
So, and to your point, Dr. Garza, I'm not suggesting that we do that. I think, along the same lines, I think we talk to the different religious organizations and ask them when they would expect their families to be pulling their children. And I realize then we would be kind of picking and choosing. So maybe we can't go in that direction, but I think. Oh, right. It would have to, oh, no, we couldn't do it this year, I don't believe, because, we would have to do have a lot of conversations. And then perhaps just maybe highlight, if nothing else, in what goes out quarterly from you, maybe just highlight, say, these are the ones where you can really expect to see, some of these schools can really expect to see a large number of student absences. So anyway, I realize it gets tricky, but that would be my advocacy.
Thank you, Chairman Evans. Ms. Hines?
Yes, thank you. So almost everything's been said. But it's funny. It's like the calendar, it feels like Groundhog Day every year, right? There are almost no new questions, but there are also no bad questions because I think that everybody faces this again every year. And Dr. Ramey, I'm thinking that that new HRAC probably needs to get engaged pretty soon. You and I should chat probably. We'll get that going. I hesitate to ask, but I don't see Inauguration Day on here. We decided just not to have the day off for Inauguration Day.
So it's built into this year's calendar.
I'm sorry.
This is for next year.
I'm thinking, never mind. It has not even been a long day, so there's no excuse for that. So you're right. Thank you. The survey, I just had a couple questions about it. You said it'll be open as long as we need it. And that means until the board makes a decision?
Until the board makes a decision, we can keep that open.
Okay.
And we can give regular updates to let you know how the calendars are trending.
That would be great, thank you. And I was just wondering, how secure is the survey in the sense, can someone answer it 100 times?
You could, but we can check IP addresses, and I've taken a quick look at IP addresses and have noted that maybe one or two have the same, but there could be spouses in the same family who have taken the survey on the same computer.
Let's just say
or on
this,
the
if they've
same
taken it
phone.
more than once, they feel very passionate about it.
Yes.
So their opinion extra matters. Huh?
Right.
Is that what- well, I just think, right, going with the, what seems to be the overwhelming feeling of the community, and I kind of get it. When we're starting earlier, I think by the time we get to that holiday in the wintertime, people are going to want the full 2 weeks, I just think it's going to feel like a long stretch in the fall. And to give it up for a day at the end of the year, to give up a full 2 weeks for one day at the end of the year, I can kind of understand where people are on that. So I support version 7.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. We have one go back at this point, but I wanted to make one point and ask a question. The point is, let's hope that we're not celebrating next inauguration in the following school year. Let's hope that we can complete the election and have it finalized before then. There's been some rumors that maybe that it won't be done. The question I have
Your
is,
time is over.
I didn't make any statement as to who.
No, of course not.
I did have one question though, because one of the comments that I have received from parents is that with regards to the 2 weeks, for some parents it's a difficult. They're not taking long vacations. Maybe both parents are working, and maybe Dr. Lockhart or Dr. Garza, do we have any programming in place that helps out those families to be able to, other than, is it just SAC, or is even SAC available during that time?
Yes, I believe SAC is available during I'm not sure it's every day. There are probably certain identified holidays during the 2 weeks, but they usually are available, yes.
Yeah, I know in the summer there are a lot of third-party groups that come in and hold things in the schools. Do we make an effort to try to do that for like one of the weeks during a 2-week break?
I'm not, with the exception of SAC, I'm not going to suggest right now that we have made a concerted effort necessarily to give students a lot of enrichment during the full 2 weeks. I'm not suggesting it would be a bad thing, but that's probably been limited during the winter break, Mr. Wilson. I think down the road, where we have the universal screener and the online systems that we're piloting in the 15 schools, down the road, I don't even think we'll have snow days. We'll have work from home days for our kids. It's just, right now our teachers don't have a lot of tools, and some of our students maybe aren't equipped yet. But right now, I would say pretty limited.
Yeah, and I think I concur with the majority I would agree with the majority of participants in the survey. So we have Ms. Palchik.
Thank you. Actually, to your point, Mr. Wilson, I did see, I think the parks this year are going to do snow day when there are 2 or more snow days. Families can sign up for a snow day kind of winter break camp, snow day camp they called it. I received an email. So it'd be interesting to see, not for the planned ones. I do hope in the future that we have more sliding scale enrichment activities in all breaks.
SAC does the same thing. They did this past year. They were open if we had more than consecutive, or they were looking at it. Do y'all remember that?
I think so. We can follow up on that, though.
But I did receive the park servers will be doing it for 2 or more days, which I think is great. And we can hopefully, through our family parent liaisons, let families know about that. And I know we've had these conversations. A quick question, and maybe we can do it as a follow-up. I don't know if you received information at what the 10 largest school districts are doing for religious observance, holidays. I know we've looked at Montgomery County.
I have some information here, and I can pass it around and give a copy to our clerk.
Perfect.
That highlights what some of the largest districts in the country are doing with regard to recognizing holidays. There isn't an omission on this chart. We didn't list Columbus Day holiday, but you will note and be able to see what the 10 largest systems in the country are doing with regard to recognized holidays.
Thank you.
Plus local school systems.
And local school
surrounding
systems.
school systems.
And for the majority, I believe my only pushback is that I do believe, unless it changes, that currently the last day of school for calendar 7 does fall on Eid. And on calendar 8, it does not. That would be a student holiday.
Yes, on calendar 8, the last day of school is Eid al-Fitr, and that would be a teacher workday for staff, but students would not be at school that day.
For calendar 8.
For calendar 8.
And on calendar 7, it's a full last day of school or 2-day early release last day of
2
school?
hours.
2 hour early release.
2-hour day for students.
2 hour day.
Yes.
Okay. So it is almost a non-day. Okay. Thank you. And I know we don't like 2 hour early releases as parents, but if there's any way that the first day of Rosh Hashanah, 21st, leading into teacher planning day, could be the 2 hour early release, I think that would help some of the students who are missing quite a bit of school. But I do think it highlights next year, because so many big holidays like Yom Kippur and Eid are falling on a Saturday, I think it's especially important that we inform schools and teachers what that means, because students cannot be working during that time. And so just when we look at workload and assignments, making sure that we are communicating that. So I hope we'll come back to that point, especially for next year. Thank you. Thank you so much, Marty, for all your work on this.
Oh, certainly.
Thank you, Ms. Palchik. We are running about 10 minutes beyond the hour allocated for this portion of the work session. Ms. McLaughlin did have one go back.
10 minutes?
Yeah, so let's wrap up within 10 minutes here.
No, 1 hour and 10 minutes.
Yes, we're at 1 hour and 10 minutes, yes.
I'm glad that there was that clarification just now, because it was something actually I wanted to make a note of. We go into this every year, and I guess we just haven't really decided as a school system the logic behind it. But the last day of school, where it's 2 hours, I really struggle with the fact that you think about the cost of what we spend per day of busing kids to school, and we literally bus these kids. Some of them have a 45-minute bus ride. We bring them into school, they're there for 2 hours, and we turn around and bus them right back home. And I don't understand that. If
Our only choice is to keep them longer.
right, I actually don't understand how it even qualifies as an instructional day for 2 hours. So, I think that where we haven't wanted to necessarily, tack on a day for the sake of a day, it amazes me that I don't know of other school districts that do that. And I've had no answer to the people in my district when they have said, this is almost illogical that we are spending, I wish Mr. Plattenberg were here to tell us, but does anybody remember how much it is per day we spend on busing? It's not a small number. It's, over $100,000? $200,000? Or, yeah, okay. Everybody, we understand, over $100,000 to bus kids in for 2 hours. So, and I really want you to know that I think I have to start thinking long and hard about why we just keep doing it because we always do it. There has to be a better solution than that. It really is a problem, I think. So I want to plant that seed, Mr. Wilson, and I'll let you close it out.
Okay, an excellent point, actually, but I'm not going to close it out because Ms. Huff would like to also have one go back.
I promise it's quick. So on the wording on the calendar for the snow days, we write up to 13 equivalent days missed, and it says built in. And so I think, right, no, so I understand that, but I think in trying to communicate, we just spent time saying how we actually don't build in days, but our wording on the calendars that we built them in. And so maybe just in helping communicate, we can figure out a different way to
We can
to
work
write
on that. We can work on that wording, certainly.
Okay.
And before we end, I do have to thank Sherry Burris, who is in the room with us. She's in the back. She's a technician in HR, and she's been very instrumental in developing the calendar.
And how many years have you been doing this, Sherry? Oh, your second year?
Yeah, so Cindy Trinket did it for
Cindy
many,
did
many
it for
years.
many, many years,
For
right.
many, many years prior to Sherry, and Sherry has done a wonderful job in stepping up.
I don't know that next steps are needed on this particular item, because what we've done is we will reflect your feedback on our next iterations
Yeah,
of the
that
calendar.
makes
Is that
sense.
okay?
That's
And we'll be presenting one calendar.
And we'll be sending some information and updates.
Okay, with that, this portion of the work session is over.
So we'll take a 3-minute break, and then we'll come back for instructional services, which was scheduled for 3 o'clock. We're not gonna skip this time. So, okay, so we are 65 minutes behind.